Hey, what's going on, Clippers fans? It is me, William Updike, 1/3. Today, only one half of the hosting trio. Today, duo over at Clips and Dip. Our friend Charles cannot make it, but I'm here with Adam Oslin. We are going to be talking about James Harden's debut, what we liked, what we didn't like from that first game against the Knicks, which did result in an ugly road loss. We'll also talk about Mason Plumlee and what his loss could mean. And finally, we will preview the upcoming game against the Nets in the Clippers New York doubleheader. Adam, how's it going? How you doing today, man?
I'm good, Will. Long time. I'm kidding. We talked last night on Clips and Double Dip on Clippers Talk as well, but more to dig into and get more in depth on from the first game with James Harden.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start right there. If you somehow missed it, the Clippers dropped a road game to the Knicks, 97 to 111 in that one. Let's start out with some things that we did like from this one. I know this was a loss that it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong here, the fan base took pretty hard.
Yeah, there wasn't much overreaction on Clippers talk, but on Twitter, on X, it got borderline toxic with somewhat of an overreaction and maybe confirmation bias for some of the people who just didn't want James Harden to begin with. So therefore, they lose a ball game. See, I was right. I told you.
Oh,
And let's have some perspective. They started 0-5 with Russell Westbrook last season, but overall, I think it's worked.
500 team with Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, well, records are pretty devoid of context, and not having
You
Ivica
are who your record
Zubats
says you are, I've heard.
I heard that sports cliche, and it is called a cliche for a reason. I think there's more to it than that. For instance, the teams they started off against, not having Ivica Zubats with Russell Westbrook, and having some really close losses where I don't think it was Russell Westbrook's fault
We
that
are
they
getting
lost
so
that
carried away.
game
We're on
in
Russ right
Denver.
now. We're somehow on Russ. I brought up some of the negative opinions here in Clipper Nation. Let's bring it back to what we liked in this game, Clippers versus Knicks.
Sure. Take me down that road. Receipts Adam is coming.
I
Uh,
know you are. I know you are, and you know I'm here for it. But
you
you got a
called
hard
down the
out. We we
thunder.
we, we got
Well,
to
now
stay
you got
focused.
it. Okay, so record be damned. The Clippers, yes, are 0-1 with James Harden. I think there's more to it than that because James Harden actually played pretty darn well last night in his 31 minutes. It was interesting to see that, you know, he was going to be on a minutes restriction. It sounded like they were talking about post-game. James Harden mentioned this, whether he was going to play 28 or 34. They somewhat landed in the middle. Of course, because the game got out of hand in that fourth quarter, he wasn't asked to play longer, which, according to James Harden post-game, he likely would have. But I thought, for the most part, as out of sync as they looked offensively for a guy who hadn't played since last May in a professional basketball game, he looked all right. The rhythm and timing, 6 assists, just 2 turnovers. Harden ball, the system, whatever you want to call it, was working. And he didn't take a shot in that first quarter. And I thought easing his way in, trying to get others involved, a couple of nice passes to Ivica Zubats. He wasn't trying to do too much or play outside of himself and say, hey, I'm here. He waited till the second quarter and then had 9 quick points and got to his spots. And there was good quickness there. I thought hearing from him post game criticize his own game and a couple defensive possessions where he didn't close out well on shooters. He called himself out for that. That was good to see because I thought he had some really good possessions on the defensive end. If you guys read Law Murray of The Athletic earlier today, he did point out and highlight all the different facets of James Harden in game one, what he did offensively, on ball, off ball, defensively, had some nice video breakdowns, and there was some good defense played on that first possession. He D'd up Jalen Brunson and forced him into a tough step back jumper when it looked like he was lost at first and then recovered defensively. So I think there were some positives, and maybe we were overly optimistic. I think we all thought, okay, they're going to win this game against the Knicks. I know you and I specifically warned that, hey, this is a tough team, and their style of play, the way they muck up and muddy up the game because they're so good defensively and on the glass, that could be a tough one to find a rhythm against with James Harden in the first outing, and it was. It turned out
Yeah,
to be that way. But again, it was tied going into the fourth quarter. So, Will, how'd you feel about it?
I felt good. I feel like, we all kind of penciled in a win when we did our game prediction on this. And I do feel like that was a little premature. I feel like we were maybe playing to the Knicks record a little bit more than what we know this team is under Jalen Brunson and Tom Thibodeau as we've seen it. We did talk about how it could be a tough matchup. Some of those front court size difficulties reared their head a little bit more than I thought they were going to. And I thought defensively we really struggled to get stops in this one, which is the classic Clippers thing of like slow offense to start, not getting stops. It's not really good. And then when you compound that with 22 turnovers, there's just not really a way that you're going to be able to pull out a road win in most NBA arenas that I can think of. However, I didn't think that. I mean, obviously, Harden only had 2 turnovers, so he was responsible for less than 10% of them. And I didn't think that his introduction into the lineup really had much to do at all with that sort of disorganized or disaffected sort of approach from the Clippers. I don't know if it was their first, it's because it was the first East Coast road trip. I don't really know what contributed to that. Maybe there was just residual excitement or fallout of the team changing in terms of how many guys are now out of the rotation, not even counting the injuries to Plumlee, who I think maybe this game looks a little bit different if we would have had him in that second half. Obviously not having Terrence Mann. I'm glad that you brought up James Harden on the defensive end, because I feel like that's gotten to be one of those really sort of cliched talking points about how he can't play defense, he can't do this, he can't do that. We know him to be very good at deflections, having active hands. He can be used as a post defender pretty effectively. He is very stout. He can use that size and stability. I think it's just going to be a matter of tailoring to his strong suits in order to make that unit as good as it can be defensively, which we haven't talked about this in a minute, but since the addition of James Harden, you expected the Clippers to finish top 5 defensively. Is that still attainable? And if so, what do you think is the path towards that?
Well, first we're going to have to see what happens with Mason Plumlee. We're hoping for the best. I think best case scenario, judging by this type of injury, is what? He's only out 3 weeks. That would be good news. I would sign up for that today.
Oh, any day. It looked a little bit more serious than that, is why you can't see us on the video, but I'm grimacing. I'm big time grimacing. It looked a little bit more serious than a 3-week injury.
Yeah, as I'm saying, best case scenario, it's just a sprain or a low level sprain. But if he's out for an extended period of time, it's going to be difficult for this team, because we saw them start off last season without a true backup big. And we talked about last night, one of the areas that would really help boost their defense and help get them into being a top 5 defense is Ivica Zubac. The way he started off last season, they were a top 5 defense despite not being very good on the perimeter. He was just making up for everybody else's mistakes out there. He may have a big opportunity coming up for extended minutes, and he played 30 plus last night, but I didn't think he had a good ball game. I think he finished 8-7, but 5 turnovers for Ivica Zubac. He led them in that department, and 22 turnovers leading to 35 points for the New York Knicks. That's almost impossible to overcome. And
the difficult thing with that too is it's not like the Knicks were perfect with the ball. They had 19 turnovers of their own. We just, we didn't capitalize in the same way at the same level that they were able to.
No, 35 points off 22 turnovers is elite. I mean, you typically want a point per turnover, and that's pretty good. 35 on 22 is unreal, and it speaks to the Clippers not being good enough in transition. I think at least 13 of those were live ball turnovers, so not just the ball going out of bounds, and then you can set your defense, but the Knicks were coming the other way very quickly. And the Clippers, I think it was also wrong place, wrong time. Julius Randle was due. He was shooting just 27% coming into the ball game, and he scores 27 points against the Clippers. RJ Barrett was very good. We didn't know if he was going to play. He had 26 points out there. But in going back to the defense, and can they still be a top 5 defense with James Harden? I think it's going to make things more difficult, but I like the effort I saw last night to where it's still not impossible. It's still attainable, but guys got to lock in. And I think the formula or the recipe for them to be a top 5 defense now is, oh, there's less on the plate of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And on Podcast P, Paul George talked about it recently, just yesterday in the new episode, saying, I can show off other parts of my game. I can expend energy elsewhere because there's less asked of me offensively. They're their two best defenders, Kawhi and Paul George still. I think that gets lost sometimes because you look at how good they are offensively and how well they had been playing coming into that game last night and just how much is asked there. Well, now I think when you're missing 3 forwards that were in the rotation the last couple of seasons, those are your 2 guys that have to take up the defensive responsibility there, lost from Batum, Rocco, and Marcus Morris.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And they're better than those guys defensively. It just depends on how much they're able to focus in on that end.
Yeah, more versatile, more athletic. So the big thing that I liked from this game is I do feel we got glimpses, even though we didn't get a win, of how much easier Harden can make things for some of the other guys. And I thought one person who really benefited in this game was Norman Powell, who had quietly had a 14-point game where he was incredibly efficient, 71% from the floor, 67% from 3. And that is like that's like the overall thing that I think that I'm most excited for offensively with Harden is not just like what he can do. He is an incredible 3-level scorer, which we still saw on display in this game, but just how he can open things up for everyone else.
Yeah, Norm going 5 of 7 and 4 of his 5 makes being 3-pointers. That was good to see. I think Norm just needs to be a quicker decision maker out there. Either put it up, be a catch and shoot 3-pointer, because they're not asking you to create. They're asking you to get the ball and go. Put up a 3 or attack the basket. Just be an analytics guy, because when he's going right, he's really tough to stop. He's a great finisher that way. And he's obviously a very good 3-point shooter and can be elite on that end. I just want to see him be better defensively. I think we've seen it at times. There were some possessions where he definitely got lost yesterday, and some of that could just be new rotations in there, guys playing next to one another. There was that stint in the second quarter, I think, where James Harden was out there, and none of the other big 4 were. It was James Harden and the backups. And in listening to the post-game conversations going on, it may have been because James Harden on Friday got to scrimmage with the backups, and Coach Lue thought, okay, there's some continuity there. He was working very well with Mason Plumlee. I still find it a little bit curious so far this season through 6 games that we've yet to see Kawhi Leonard and Paul George staggered to the point where one of them is always on the floor. And even just seeing James Harden alone out there was a little bit surprising. I would have thought at least 2 of the big 4 now you can have on the floor at all times. But Coach Lue took some of the blame post-game, not putting guys in a position to succeed. But I know people are going after him and saying, oh, a new 10-game sample size, more tinkering from Ty. Well, some of that's just baked in. You bring in James Harden, of course that's going to happen. It kind of shifts everything around when it comes to rotations and lineups. So I don't think they have a ton of time to experiment too much. I think we've talked about this going back to last season. You got to have a sense of urgency. And I know James Harden's there and there are things to figure out, but you still have to win ball games along the way. And I was encouraged by the fact that they were tied heading into the 4th. As bad as they had played, they were tied heading into the 4th. As bad as they were in the first quarter, they still won it because they're just so talented. I just want to see that turn into wins along the way so you can get victories while also learning and developing and progressing as a team now with a big 4.
Yeah. And I mean, that brings us into things that we didn't like. That fourth quarter, I can't even remember. It was 2 minutes into the quarter, I think, before they got their first bucket. I think it was like it was like 5 minutes into the second or the fourth quarter when they got their second bucket. They were not able to get things going offensively despite the Harden addition. And I guess I got to disagree with you a little bit about the figuring out and sample size thing. I do agree that they need to have urgency. I think that it is concerning that this team, that what is the number one thing that we've been talking about, I mean, every year since they made a Western Conference final is, what is this team's identity? What are they? Who are they? What are they going to be? Where are they going? And I feel like once again, we're reaching that point. Like we kind of had a clue as to what it was going to be coming into the season. This is going to be a team that works a lot harder. This is going to be a team that's trying to go out and dominate teams on a nightly basis, and hopefully be a team that doesn't even have to play starters heavy minutes in the fourth quarter. And I'm not saying that still can't be the situation, or that still can't be what they're aiming to achieve, but it does beg some questions about what this team is going to be, which I think brings me to one of my larger dislikes, which is I don't really see, and I feel like I come down pretty hard on Westbrook sometimes in this podcast, that I know that I am interpreted as a hater, and that is fine, but I'm just not really seeing the vision of having both Harden and Westbrook in the starting lineup. I could see it situationally, perhaps in a closing lineup. I just don't I don't think that is optimizing either guy and getting the best out of your two best players in George and Kawhi. I don't see it. And that's something that I dislike. And if that's something that we're going to stick with for multiple games, when we're right now a 500 ball club and have a lot of things to figure out, I think that's putting yourself behind the 8 ball in a way that, in terms of seeding, it might be too late. It just might be too late with how our schedule is structured. It might be too late.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, we talked about it when they brought in James. What's the starting lineup going to be, and can they really play him with Russell Westbrook? I see it as somewhat problematic. There's going to be nights where it doesn't matter. They're so good offensively, they can run teams off the floor. But I don't know if that's a long-term solution where you can start those guys and always get off to your best start. When you talk about optimizing lineups, well, is James Harden playing off the ball the best version of James Harden? Is that why you bring someone in like that? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I know to get more out of Russ, he needs to be on the ball. But if he's going to be out there next to James Harden, I would rather get James Harden going and run the offense through him than Russell Westbrook. I just think he's a better passer. He's a better shooter. He's a better decision maker overall. That's not a slight to Russ, but we're talking about, I think, one of the great playmakers of all time in James Harden, especially in the pick and roll.
The reigning assist leader.
Yeah. And
not on a dirt team, like not on a bad team, a team that was very much a team that was, a blown lead over an Eastern Conference final.
Yeah. I think he had the second highest usage percentage last season, maybe to Luka Doncic. But James Harden, for him to be most effective, is to have the ball in his hands. Now, does there need to be some balancing act because now he's playing next to Kawhi and Paul George, just like when he was playing next to Kyrie and KD? Of course. It's not going to be the same as it was for him in Houston or even in Philly last year. But I've seen him thrive in that environment next to two other stars and get them to their spots. They were unbelievable. They went 13-3 in those 16 games where he was next to KD and Kyrie. So if you're wondering how long it should take for them to get up to speed, in Brooklyn, it was pretty instant chemistry. They meshed right away.
And this is a better fit, in my opinion. Yes, they're all older. They're not at the same athletic peak that they were at the start of that Brooklyn run. This is a better fit around Harden than having another guard. Durant, Durant, obviously great fit on any NBA team. But I think these two guys are a better three overall than the Nets three in terms of fit.
Well, and the other thing it does off the tip in games, if you want that backcourt with James and Russ, is it automatically moves up Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to them playing the 4. And against a team like the Knicks, there are teams that are really going to punish the Clippers when they're playing smaller like that. I don't know.
Bring PJ Tucker into that starting lineup? Is that what I'm hearing?
We did wonder if he could start just the game against the Knicks, at least, as they're still figuring things out. But he ended up playing, I think, 11 minutes. I just don't know if it's sustainable long-term, if this is really a long-term solution with James and Russ out there on the court. And that starting lineup got outscored by 13 points in, I think, 19 minutes last night. And I know it's just one game, but I think it's fundamentally possibly flawed by just
Also, how
having
many
Russ
games can
with
you give
Harden.
it? How many games can you get outscored by 13 points in 19 minutes and expect it to keep going? Especially, whatever. I know that we harp on it a lot, but like Clippers scheduling is very much hell. It's a very real thing. It's a very real part of this franchise. And this early slate of games is kind of the best looking stretch of the schedule, and to only be 500 ain't great.
Look, I said I think they need to be 9-4 at worst in their first 13 games. If they could end up starting the season off 15-5. Now, I didn't know they were getting James now, and that changes things. And maybe it's one step back to take 2 or 3 steps forward. So some of those games
Very
we
true.
weren't counting on them winning later in the season during the gauntlet of their schedule, they have a better chance of winning because more high-end talent with James Harden. It could work out like that. I didn't expect it all to come together at once, but I do want to emphasize, I agree with you to your point of there has to be a sense of urgency regardless of all these moves going on, because Denver's 7-1, Dallas is 6-1, Golden State's 6-2. The Timberwolves just got a big victory over Denver. They're 4-2. There are a lot of good teams in this league that have hit the ground running, including the Mavericks, who they're going to see on Friday. And by the way, in between there, we'll get into in the next segment, but the Brooklyn Nets are more talented than their record, just like the New York Knicks were.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great, wow. What are you, a pro or something? That's a great transition. We're going to talk about that preview coming up against the Nets in just a minute. First, we're going to do a couple of ads. If they've been too loud for you, please contact 213 Hoops. They will cut you a check, talk to your injury attorney. Anyway, ads coming up in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back into season 2 of Clips and Dip. I'm Adam Oslin. We got Will Updike, as we're going to do a little bit of a preview of games to come this week. If you missed the last segment, we talked about James Harden and his opener and his debut with the Clippers. No Chuck in this one. He'll be returning those shortly. We'll have the triumphant tripod. What is it?
Triumphant trio?
The trio will be back together. Don't worry about that in full effect. But the Clippers have a fearsome foursome, if they can figure it all out, and they need to soon, because I know it's early in the season, but this is a team that I just feel like they got to figure it out because they have too much talent. The one thing we talked about against the Knicks going into it was we knew they would junk up the game. There would be moments that would be tough stretches for the Clippers. They would turn the ball over, but you would just hope talent would overwhelm the Knicks in the end. Even if it wasn't a pretty victory, the Clippers could figure it out. All right, so they lose that one. Talent needs to overcome the Brooklyn Nets, who, by the way, they're playing pretty darn good basketball. Their last 2 losses, I know they're 3-4, but were to the Bucks in a game they were in, and to the Boston Celtics, the 2 best teams in the Eastern Conference. And in games where Spencer Dinwiddie went 1 for 4 and Dorian Finney-Smith went 3 for 12, they still just lost by 4 to Milwaukee. So they're in a similar position, I think, where the Knicks were. They had just lost to the Bucks. They had lost to the Boston Celtics, where they're desperate for a victory at home, and they want to show some of their potential to their fan base. So it's not going to be an easy game tomorrow either. And by the way, James Harden, a former Brooklyn Net, if you didn't know, I don't know if he's going to get booze. I don't know if he'll get a tribute video or what, but it's going to be a emotionally charged ball game, I think, too, out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you look at 2 things for the Nets, to me, that spell trouble for the Clippers. They're second, I believe, in the league in they're second in fast break points per game. I think they're averaging like 21 points per game. That spells trouble for the Clippers. They also score a high percentage of their total points off of threes. So you get a team that gets that hot shooting start at home against a road team coming off of a bad loss, maybe, on their laurels a little bit. That's a bad start. And then you combine that with a team that's really able to capitalize on the fast break, something that Clippers have struggled to defend, are going to continue to struggle to defend, because I think the defensive side of the ball in the James Harden fit is going to be the larger issue, I think, overall, depending on what they do matchup wise. But this is not an easy game, and you also have Mikal Bridges in the Nets, a guy who has seen the Clippers time and time again in playoff runs, in big games, who's going to be able to dissect this defense a little bit.
He is one of the better, more underrated players in this league that is kind of having a James Harden-like moment. Like when Harden left OKC and had a bigger role all of a sudden with Houston, people realized how good he could be. Same thing's been happening with Mikal Bridges after leaving Phoenix, and he's also a really good defender. So they have some guys on this team. I believe Royce O'Neal is now in Brooklyn that they can throw at PG, at Paul George, at James Harden. He's coming off a game, Bridges, where he just had 31. Cam Thomas just had, was it 44, 45 against the Milwaukee Bucks. And by the way, last season had a 47-point outing against the Clippers where he absolutely torched them. And if they don't slow him down from the beginning, if they don't get back to, and we really haven't seen it yet in a true road game, where the Clippers at home have established themselves defensively in the first quarter so far this season, but on the road, that hasn't been there. That energy hasn't been there. They've let teams get comfortable early, and then it's just hard to stop them later in the ball game. I know the Knicks, I think, only scored 19 points and shot 29% in that first quarter, but the Clippers weren't much better from the field, and both teams just struggled.
That was a dirt first quarter.
I want to see the Clippers defense lead to offense like we've seen at times, but it was against Portland. It was against the San Antonio Spurs. I think the Magic are actually likely a play-in team. That was a solid win for the Clippers. But this Brooklyn team has a lot of firepower, and Cam Thomas is scary. Like, he just goes unconscious out there at times, like prime Gilbert Arenas or something like that. I think he hit 7 threes against the Clippers during that 47-point performance last year.
Yeah, unreal. And yeah, I don't know. This is another one that I'm very apprehensive about.
There's really no learning curve or some long runway. There's no preseason training camp here to ramp up and get James Harden assimilated quickly to this Clippers team. You have to figure it out as the live bullets are flying out there. And he talked about it last night too, how fast the game felt and how tired he got after his first stint. There's just no way to replicate actual in-game regular season basketball. There's no way to prepare for this other than getting those reps out there. So it's a Clippers team that I felt like they could get ambushed if they don't come out and start quickly against the Brooklyn Nets. And you just don't want to get down big and be in that uphill battle against a team that's a top 10 offense. Granted, they're about a bottom 5 defense, but still, it's going to be a good test for this Clippers team that is still trying to figure a lot of things out.
I think that I mean the Nets' issues defending could be sort of a godsend for this Clippers offense that's very much trying to figure out what it's going to be. It gives you an opportunity. While they still do have some great individual defenders, it does still give you an opportunity to try things out. Hopefully, we don't see 22 turnovers in this one, given the Nets' physicality and presence on defense. So this is a chance to in-game, like at game speed, try and work through a few things that we struggled with in that game against the Knicks, which, as I said in the last segment, to me, we're not really Harden dependent. But this is your opportunity to sort of, in a lower stakes defensive environment, figure out what that identity is going to be on that side of the floor.
And I think to that point, the reason there's trepidation after just one game and you don't want to overreact too much, it's just a little bit of PTSD from last season where all the talk was wait till we get it together by December. And it never came. That stretch where the Clippers locked in and looked like a dominant championship team in the regular season outside of those 14 games with Terrence Mann starting that I think have been overblown a little bit. They never really clicked in and looked like the team we thought they were going to be. So we don't want to see them kick the can down the road and say, just wait. You want to at least see more glimpses of dominance out there with James Harden, where you can just, that Brooklyn Nets team, the way they were playing offensively, and even though it was sometimes your turn, my turn, it worked with him, Kyrie, and KD. We saw it against the Clippers.
And this is a your turn, my turn kind of team. Like it or not, and at times I think it's incredibly frustrating, but it is also the same offense that minus James Harden was the best half-court offense 3 years ago, which, granted, is a long time. It is a long time, but it's also the last time that we had our two stars healthy for a sustained stretch. So I think that he can it kind of works both ways for me for Harden, right? Like he's still a very adept one-on-one scorer. He's still a guy that you can give the ball and get a bucket at a high level. I know we say that about a lot of guys. We say that about backup guys. We say that about Norm Powell. There are few guys, especially that there's few guys in the league that can do it like Harden does and has and will continue to do. And there's none that can do it at that level that was a realistic get for the Clippers. So I think both ways in terms of him, using his facilitating and playmaking, and the Clippers utilizing more movement and more ways to get everybody involved. I think obviously that's great. That's the peak. That's the pinnacle. That's what we're hoping for. But even in sort of this intermediary phase where it can be kind of a more, hey, let's just feed the ball to James. Hey, let's just feed the ball to Kawhi. Let's kind of see what happens. Let's kind of see how we can make this work. I think that you do have a guy who's very adept in that sort of system, and 3 to, I guess, 4 players, if you're including Russ, who are willing to make that kind of a thing work, which hopefully, you can still put away ball games while playing that sort of less coherent offense.
Yeah, I don't normally say this, but I would be okay with some bad process victories right now as they still figure it out and eventually become a more well-oiled machine out there. And I think part of the PTSD and Clippers fans being apprehensive right now are a little bit unsure after just one game. Of course, you don't want to overreact too much, but the loss of Mason Plumlee, we don't know how long it's going to be.
That's going to be massive. It's going to be huge.
And
we didn't talk about it last segment, but to end the half, Mason Plumlee had just a great sequence on both ends of the floor. He hit a tough bucket over Mitchell Robinson when the Clippers needed a bucket. He then got a block, which Russ was able to grab the ball off the tip. Ended up in a take foul, and then a couple of possessions later, Mason Plumlee drew a charge and had the Clippers at, what was it, Adam? I believe it was a 7-point lead at the half. He really helped them pile it on a little bit there in those minutes when they needed it.
Yeah, and before he went down in the third, he had that nice dish to Kawhi Leonard for a big dunk, I believe. And I wonder how much that played into just the Clippers looking deflated in that fourth quarter. Seeing a big like that go down the way he did, a scary-looking injury
Absolutely
where
brutal.
Julius Randle is flying for the basketball and runs into his knee, and them having to carry him off. It's not easy to get up after that and still to maintain that same level of energy you had.
Especially when your team is the patron saint of freak injuries.
Yeah, it feels like Groundhog's Day again, I'm sure. So what are we thinking if Mason Plumlee is out for a while? We don't expect him to play this week at least. Moussa Diabate got some run last night. We mentioned PJ Tucker getting some run. Ivica Zubac is going to have to be more consistent, something we talked about post-game last night. He can't be the one leading them in turnovers when they're trying to give him touches and give him looks. They may have to sign somebody like Wenyen Gabriel back with the Clippers, who they had before on a 10-day contract. Just somebody to fill the void right now, because I don't know how ready Moussa Diabate is or how much the coaching staff trusts him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's something to worry about. I think that's a good note to close on. We got to consider we got to consider Mason. Our hopes is that he is able to make a speedy recovery. Hopefully things aren't as bad as it looked in the video. As it's so hard to tell with those injuries, the amount of actual structural damage or anything. Things can sometimes look a lot worse than they actually are, and sometimes things can look not so bad in their
yeah, like Paul George. We thought that was like, oh, he's going to be out the next season when he got hurt.
Yeah.
So you never know. You never want to speculate too much. But like you said, we're hoping for a speedy recovery, and we're hoping the Clippers can somehow hold the fort down on the interior without him for a little bit, as they're likely going to be.
All right. Final predictions before we get on out of here. What are you thinking on this one, Adam?
I think what you brought up with the Brooklyn Nets defensively, being 25th on defense, it gives the Clippers an opportunity to have a nice bounce back offensive performance. Seeing a team like the Knicks going to the opposite spectrum against a team like the Nets that focuses on offense and their defense is where they struggle. I think this Clippers team, we're going to see them click in some spurts, and they're going to show flashes of brilliance on offense. and it'll be a high scoring game. Maybe it'll be in the 120s, but the Clippers will figure out a way to win this one.
Yeah. I don't think I once again don't think it's going to be an easy win, but this is one for me that is imperative. You have to at least split this like New York doubleheader. So I'm predicting a win. Like I said, not easy. But that is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much. It's just the two of us. We will have Charles back. I think he's back on Saturday, so we'll get together sometime after that. You will hear him on Clippers Talk tomorrow post game. That's over at AM 570. You can listen to Adam there for all your post, pre, and post game Clipper game needs. He's doing the heavy lifting over there. But yeah, we're Clips and Dip. You can check us out over on YouTube. That's at Clippers Podcast. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, I don't know, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Deezer, anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can listen to the show. We're over on Twitter or X or whatever the heck you want to call it. That's at Clippers Pod. We'd love to chop it up with you anytime. Adam, before we get out of here, leave the fans with something positive.
I know we've gone over things in a granular level here in just one game with James Harden, but it is in fact just one game. And if there's anybody that can make this thing mesh, just like he did with Russell Westbrook, in my opinion, it's Coach Lue. He can figure this out, and it sounds like the guys do want to buy in. I know it's early. I know it could just be player talk, but I think there is something to being back in Southern California and trying to do something special for a city they grew up in. So I expect them to sacrifice, which is going to be the operative word all season long. And if they do that, they have a great chance to get rolling here sooner than later.
All right. That'll do it for today's episode. And as Charles always says, let's go Clips.